Look around you, right now. If you're wearing glasses or contact lenses, take them off for just a second. Watch the world dissolve into a soft, useless blur. The faces, the edges, the distance, all of it smearing into vague shapes and colors. Now, imagine that blur is permanent, that there are no glasses to put back on, no contacts, no lasers, no lenses, no opticians, nothing, anywhere, that can ever sharpen the world again. This is simply how you see now, forever. And now place yourself, with those blurry eyes, into the Stone Age. A world where a predator could be crouched in the tall grass 20 feet away, and you'd never see it until it moved. Where the cliff edge, the venomous snake, the prey on the distant ridge, that means the difference between eating and starving, all of it depends on your ability to see clearly, at a distance, in time. In that world, your eyes were not just useful. They were one of your most important survival tools. They were the early warning system that kept you alive. Try to really inhabit it for a moment. Imagine seeing the world through the eyes of a healthy Stone Age hunter. You stand on a rise at dawn, and you can pick out a herd of animals as tiny specks on a ridge. So far away you could walk for an hour and not reach it. You notice the single blade of grass that bent the wrong way, telling you something passed this way recently. You catch, in your side vision, the faint twitch of an ear in a thicket 200 feet off, and you freeze because you know what it might be. Your eyes are constantly working at the very limit of the horizon, reading a vast, bright, open world in stunning detail. This was normal. This was the baseline. The human eye, at its best, in the environment it was built for, is an extraordinary instrument. Now hold that picture in your mind because it's going to matter later, when we talk about what your own eyes are doing right now. So what happened to the people whose eyes failed them? What happened if you had bad eyesight in the Stone Age? In a world with absolutely no way to fix it, you might assume the answer is simple and grim. That bad eyesight was a quick death sentence, and that's that. But here's the thing, nobody tells you. The real story has two halves, and both of them are genuinely surprising. The first half is about just how dangerous poor vision could be, but the second half flips the whole question on its head, and it ends up revealing something startling, not about our ancestors, but about you and your eyes right now. So let's start with the danger, because it was very real. For a hunter-gatherer, clear vision was woven into nearly every part of staying alive. Think about everything the eyes had to do. You needed to spot predators before they spotted you. Picking out the still shape of a big cat against dappled shadow, catching the flick of movement in the brush. You needed to find food, scanning the horizon for game, spotting ripe plants and hidden roots, and the subtle signs of animals passing through. You needed to read tracks in the dirt, follow a trail, judge the age of a footprint. You needed to navigate dangerous terrain, to see the loose rock, the steep drop, the deep water. And you needed to read the faces and gestures of your own group, to communicate, to bond, to coordinate. Sharp eyes did all of that. And so, a serious problem with your vision could genuinely be life-threatening. A person who couldn't see a threat coming was more likely to be caught by it. A person who couldn't spot prey or food at a distance was a less effective provider. In the most severe cases, profound vision loss in that unforgiving world could absolutely contribute to an early death, through accident, through predation, through simply not being able to do the things survival demanded. We should not sugarcoat that. For our ancestors, the eyes were survival equipment, and losing them was a serious, sometimes fatal blow. But now, here's where the story takes its first surprising turn. Because we've been assuming that bad eyesight was just as common back then as it is now. And that assumption is almost certainly wrong. Look around any modern classroom, any office, any crowded street. A huge proportion of the people you see need glasses or contacts to see clearly at a distance. This condition, nearsightedness or myopia, where faraway things look blurry, is so incredibly common today that we treat it as a normal, almost universal part of being human. In some parts of the world, the majority of young people are now nearsighted. Globally, it's roughly 1 in 3 people, and rising fast. But here's the stunning part. This was very likely not the case for our Stone Age ancestors. The evidence strongly suggests that widespread nearsightedness is, to a large degree, a modern phenomenon. Our ancestors, by and large, probably had excellent distance vision, sharp, far-seeing eyes, well-suited to scanning a horizon. The epidemic of blurry distance vision that defines the modern world appears to be just that. Modern? So how can that be? If our genes haven't fundamentally changed in the few thousand years since the Stone Age, why are so many of us nearsighted now, when our ancestors mostly weren't? And the answer is one of the most fascinating examples of how our modern way of life is reshaping our own bodies. The leading explanation is that nearsightedness is driven, in large part, not by our genes alone, but by our environment and how we use our eyes, especially in childhood. And two things about modern life seem to be the key culprits. The first is a lack of time spent outdoors in natural daylight. There is now strong evidence that children who spend lots of time outside in bright natural light are significantly less likely to become nearsighted. The bright light of the sun appears to play a crucial role in how the eyeball grows during childhood, helping it develop into the correct shape for clear, distant vision. And our ancestors, of course, spent virtually all of their time outdoors, bathed in natural light from dawn to dusk. Their growing eyes got exactly the environment evolution expected. The second culprit is the opposite. The huge amount of time we now spend focusing on things up close. Reading, writing, and above all, staring at screens and books and devices, held close to our faces for hours and hours every single day, especially as children. This relentless close-up focus, this near work, appears to encourage the eyeball to grow too long, which is exactly what produces nearsightedness. Our ancestors did almost no sustained close-up focusing of this kind. Their eyes were constantly adjusting to the middle and far distance, the natural state our visual system evolved for. So put those two together. Our ancestors lived outdoors, in bright light, with their eyes constantly focused on the far and middle distance. And we live indoors, in dim artificial light, with our eyes locked onto screens and pages just inches from our faces. We have, without realizing it, created the perfect conditions for producing the very blurry distance vision that would have been so dangerous in the ancient world. The modern epidemic of bad eyesight is, in a sense, a mismatch. Stone Age eyes trying to grow up in a world they were never designed for. Let that sink in for a moment. The blurry vision you might have, the glasses on your face right now, may not be some random bad luck of biology. They may be a direct consequence of a childhood spent indoors, looking at things up close, in a way no human before the modern era ever experienced. Your bad eyesight isn't ancient. It's a side effect of the modern world. And you can actually see this pattern in the historical record of the last century or so. As societies industrialized, as schooling became universal, as children began spending their days indoors bent over books and later screens, rates of nearsightedness climbed, and in some places they have absolutely exploded in just a few generations. This isn't slow evolution. Genes don't change that fast. It's our environment changing at lightning speed and dragging our eyes along with it. In certain parts of the world today, the majority of young adults are nearsighted, a rate that would have been almost unimaginable to a population, living the way humans lived for hundreds of thousands of years. And there's something quietly important hidden in this, something worth saying plainly. If you have bad eyesight, there is nothing wrong with you. Your eyes are not defective. They are perfectly good Stone Age eyes that were grown in a world full of close-up screens and indoor light, instead of the bright, far-horizoned world they were expecting. The problem isn't your biology. The problem is the mismatch between your ancient eyes and your modern life. You took a magnificent instrument designed to scan a sunlit savanna, and you raised it in a dim room staring at glowing rectangles a hand's width from your nose. Of course, it grew a little differently. It did exactly what the environment told it to do. So here's the question that should be sitting in the back of your mind. If our ancestors mostly had great distance vision, then who actually did have bad eyesight in the Stone Age? Because clearly, some people did. So who were they, and what happened to them? And the answer is that ancient vision problems were mostly different from the dominant modern one. The big threats to an ancestor's eyesight weren't from childhood near work. They came from age, from injury, and from disease. The most universal one is age. Here's something that comes for nearly everyone who lives long enough, then and now. As you get older, the lens inside your eye gradually stiffens and slowly loses its ability to focus on things up close. It's why so many older people today hold a menu or a phone at arm's length to read it. This affected our ancestors just as it affects us, meaning that an older hunter-gatherer would likely have found close-up tasks like detailed tool making or removing a splinter, increasingly difficult with age. And then there are cataracts, a clouding of the eye's lens that also tends to come with age and which can progress untreated all the way to blindness. With no surgery to remove them, cataracts would have slowly stolen the sight of many of our ancestors who lived into older age. It's worth noting that this gives us a poignant reversal of the modern situation. Today, our most common eye problem strikes the young, the nearsighted schoolchild squinting at the board. In the Stone Age, the most common, serious eye problems came at the other end of life, gradually, to those who had already survived long enough to grow old. Bad eyesight wasn't the mark of a struggling child. More often, it was the mark of a life lived long, a body that had made it to old age in a world where simply getting old was itself an achievement. And beyond aging, there was injury and disease. In a rough, dangerous world, eyes got damaged. A stray branch, a thorn, a fight, a spark from a fire, an accident during the hunt, and infections of the eye, with no medicine to treat them, could and did cause permanent blindness. So, the person with bad eyesight in the Stone Age was less likely to be a nearsighted child, and more likely to be an elder whose vision was fading, or someone who had lost their sight to an accident or an illness. So now we arrive at the real heart of the question. What happened to those people? The elder going blind from cataracts, the hunter who lost an eye to an accident, the person whose sight was failing, were they simply abandoned, left to die, as useless to a survival-driven group? And here, the answer connects to something we've seen again and again in these stories, and it's genuinely beautiful. Because humans are not lone wolves. We never were. We survive as groups, and groups can carry, support, and find a place for members who can no longer do everything. Think about it. Even if your distance vision was failing, what could you still do? An enormous amount. You could still use your hands. A person with poor eyesight could still help process food, prepare hides, weave, tend the fire, and care for children. Their hands still worked, their knowledge was still intact. In fact, a fading-eyed elder was very likely a treasure to the group, a living library of decades of accumulated wisdom about where to find water in a drought, which plants healed and which killed, how to survive the rare and terrible events that only the old had lived through. We've talked before about how the elderly were valued as keepers of knowledge. A person doesn't need perfect eyes to remember, to advise, to teach, and the group could shift roles. The person who could no longer see well enough to hunt at a distance could take on the closer, camp-based work. The community could, in effect, work around an individual's limitations, slotting them into the roles where their remaining abilities still shone. This is the deep magic of human social life. We don't each have to be perfect at everything. We pool our abilities, and we cover one another's weaknesses. No single human had to be good at everything, because no single human ever stood alone. The sharp-eyed young hunter and the wise, dim-eyed elder each had their place, and each made the other stronger. In a very real sense, the group became the eyes of the person who could no longer see. We watched out for each other, literally. There may even have been ways that losing one sense sharpened the others. We know that when people lose their sight, the brain often adapts, and the remaining senses, hearing, touch, can become more acute and more finely attended to. A person whose eyes had dimmed might become the one who heard the distant change in the birdsong that signaled a predator, or who felt the shift in the wind that warned of coming weather, or who knew the landscape so intimately by memory and sound that they could still move through familiar ground with confidence. And think about the role of the storyteller, the keeper of the group's myths and history and songs. That is a role that needs no eyes at all. A blind elder, sitting by the fire, holding the entire oral library of the people in their memory and passing it to the children, was performing one of the most vital jobs in the whole community. In a world without writing, the person who remembered everything was priceless, and they could do that work in total darkness. Vision was precious, yes, but it was never the only thing a human being had to offer. Now, I have to be honest with you, the way this channel always tries to be. This was not a guarantee. A small group on the edge of starvation could not always afford to support a member who needed constant help. And in the very harshest times, the most vulnerable, including those who had lost their sight, were the most likely to suffer and die. Sudden, total blindness in a healthy adult would have been a devastating blow, hard for any group to fully absorb. The compassion was real, and it saved many. But like all the care our ancestors offered one another, it existed in tension with the brutal limits of their world. Sometimes love was enough, sometimes it wasn't. But the overall picture is clear and, I think, moving. Bad eyesight in the Stone Age was not a simple automatic death sentence. For the most part, it wasn't even the kind of bad eyesight we have today. The people who did lose their vision, mostly to age, injury, or disease, were often supported and valued by their groups, finding new roles and contributing in new ways, becoming the keepers of memory, while others became the keepers of the watch. They survived because they were part of something larger than themselves. So let's bring this whole story together. What happened if you had bad eyesight in the Stone Age? First, you probably didn't have the most common modern kind at all, because the nearsightedness that fills our world with glasses is largely a product of modern, indoor, screen-lit, close-focused life. A mismatch between our ancient eyes and our new world. Second, if your vision did fail, usually through age, injury, or disease, it was a serious challenge, sometimes a fatal one, in a world where seeing was surviving. But third, and most importantly, you were not alone. You lived inside a web of people who could carry you, find a place for you, and become your eyes when your own gave out. Your value to the group was never just in your vision. It was in your hands, your memory, your knowledge, your presence. And that, in the end, is the real lesson hiding inside this question. Our ancestors survived not because every individual was a flawless specimen, but because they were a team. Because the group could absorb the weaknesses of the one. The failing eyes of the elder were covered by the sharp eyes of the young, and the sharp eyes of the young were guided by the deep memory of the elder. That mutual support, that pooling of strengths and covering of weaknesses, is one of the great secrets of how a soft, slow, vulnerable creature like us came to inherit the earth. So, here's my last question for you. Right now, you may be reading these very words on a glowing screen, held close to your face, indoors, in artificial light, doing the exact thing that, over a lifetime, helps produce the blurry distance vision our ancestors rarely had. Your eyes, beautifully evolved over millions of years to scan a bright, open, far-horizoned world, are instead being asked to stare at close, glowing rectangles for most of your waking life. So maybe the real question isn't what happened to people with bad eyesight in the Stone Age. Maybe it's this. What is happening right now to ours? And if our ancestors could see the world so much more clearly than we can, with no lenses at all, what exactly have we traded away for the world we built? Let me know what you think in the comments. I genuinely want to hear it. Until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I'll see you soon.